This story tells the real life journey of a man who spent 20 years battling addiction and came back from the edge of the abyss. Collapse, loss, regret, and rebirth. You will witness the dark reality of addiction and discover whether escape is truly possible. Enjoy the video.
I'm Jack, 34 years old, originally from Birmingham, but I grew up in London. The last 20 years of my life have been consumed by addiction. I first used drugs when I was 14. At first, it was just for fun. Everything seemed fine until I was around 16 or 17. I would get together with friends, have a good time, and get high. Back then, I never thought it could become a problem. But after a while, things changed. At first, I was using drugs. Then, the drugs started using me. At some point, I wasn't taking them for pleasure anymore. I needed them just to function. I lost control. Addiction made me aggressive, overly emotional, and disconnected from people. There were days when I wouldn't leave my house or speak to anyone. My mind was fixated on one thought: where would I get my next dose? As time passed, everything in my life started to disappear. First, I lost my friends. Then, my relationship with my family deteriorated. I became completely detached from life. Nothing made sense anymore. Not success, not happiness, not even hope. It felt like nothing was possible without drugs. Eventually, I seriously thought about ending my life. At that moment, there was nothing else in my mind, just the desire to die. I called my mother. I called my father. I said goodbye to my mother, and to my father. His last words still echo in my head. If you die, we die. If you live, we live. Then he hung up. It's hard to describe how I felt in that moment. My brain was only focused on the drugs. My emotions suffocated me. Even my breathing felt heavy. To an addict, drugs become more important than family, loved ones, even life itself. You don't even wait for the people you love as much as you wait for that next fix. If I told you the things I saw during this period, you wouldn't believe me. I saw people on the streets of London selling everything they had just to get high. I saw men pawning their wives' bracelets, their children's toys, just to buy drugs. I saw people selling their own sisters, their own wives. I saw people offering their mothers in exchange for another hit. If I described what I witnessed, it would make your stomach turn. Now, I don't know where I am. I exist, but am I really alive? I'm not sure. In the short term, especially while working in the tourism industry, I traveled to beautiful places. But whenever I wasn't using drugs, I would find an excuse to quit my job. I kept changing workplaces, constantly restless. If I got bored, I simply stopped going to work, because my life was entirely controlled by drugs. If there were no drugs, I felt like I didn't exist. I began drifting away from my family. I rarely went home, maybe once a year. I barely saw my friends. Every penny I earned went toward drugs. I would get paid at the start of my shift, then take the next day off just so I could use faster. That became my way of living. I couldn't even step outside without using. I stopped eating. I couldn't function. If I ever tried to eat, it was minimal. A snack here, a bite there. Even if a full meal was placed in front of me, I would take 2 bites and leave it. The moments I wasn't using, I was consumed by rage. Constant frustration. I became aggressive. My body ached. My brain felt like it was burning. My thoughts revolved around one thing only: getting high. This is addiction. This is what it does to you. I was aggressive, my body ached, my head pounded, and my brain felt like it was programmed solely to seek the next high. When things reach this point, the drug takes complete control. And when you try to regain control, that's when the real struggle begins. You can't think about anything else. Your entire life revolves around the drug. You lose sleep, you stop eating, and your mind keeps running in circles, obsessing over the next fix. There were times when I experienced hallucinations, more times than I can count. I saw people who didn't exist, trees that weren't there. In my dreams, I was constantly caught in violent conflicts. At one point, I even believed I had hurt people. My mind was showing me things that weren't real. Once you enter this stage, life itself starts to collapse. Everything begins to fall apart. You lose your place in the world and life becomes nothing more than an endless cycle of substance abuse. That's when things become truly dangerous. One of the scariest experiences I had during this time happened at a train station. I was about to cross the road in Leeds, completely unaware of my surroundings. Suddenly, I saw a friend in front of me, someone I knew very well. He called out, "Come on, let's go." Without thinking, I followed him. I didn't even glance to my left, even though that was the direction the cars were coming from. I stepped forward without hesitation. The moment I took my second step, a bright light flashed from my left side. A minibus was right at my feet. It ran over my shoe, but somehow, not my foot. I had come within seconds of being killed. That moment shook me to my core. After the near miss, I collapsed onto the pavement. When I got back up, there was no one in front of me. The friend I had seen wasn't there, because he never was. It had been a hallucination, a trick played by my own mind. The realization terrified me. This was one of the most serious and dangerous moments of my addiction.
But how did it all start?
It began with a group of friends drinking wine together. We had our own circle, about 56 of us. I grew up in the streets, surrounded by people from all walks of life. One day, marijuana found its way to me. It just appeared, as if it was meant to happen. We all smoked it together. For the next 2 days, none of us saw each other. The effects of that first high lasted that long. When the third day came, we all reunited. But we weren't the same. We didn't just pick up where we left off. We started talking about how to get more. That was the moment everything changed. The people I met at that time were already deep into the lifestyle. Since I had grown up in the streets, I knew that drug dealers didn't sell to just anyone. But I was different. I knew everyone. And I was a familiar face in the neighborhood. Because of that, I was able to start collecting money from my friends to buy more. That was how it started. And from there, it escalated. Every day, without fail, we smoked. First, it was just marijuana. Then came ecstasy. After that, cocaine. Then crack. But the real breaking point, the drug that changed everything, was methamphetamine. For the past 13 years, I barely touched any other substances. Meth became my whole world. And from that moment on, things only got worse.
How did your family react when they found out?
My mother's family was deeply religious. They prayed and sought comfort in faith. My father's side, on the other hand, was more involved in gambling and lived in a different world. But addiction, this was something that belonged only to me. No one else in my family had ever used drugs. When I first told them, my mother fainted. She was in complete shock. When she regained consciousness, all I saw in her eyes was pure helplessness. That moment broke me. I couldn't bring myself to face her again, so I stayed away. For months, I didn't go home. I lived on the streets for 3 months, avoiding my family, drowning in guilt. My mother wanted me to get treatment immediately. The first time I went to rehab, I was 16, but I lasted only a month before I relapsed. Within 3 months, I was using again. The addiction was far beyond my control. Eventually, my family made a decision. If you're going to use, at least don't go outside. Stay home. That's how I started using in my own room. My late grandmother used to clean up after me, wiping away the remnants of my addiction. But things got worse. Soon, I started breaking picture frames, punching walls, destroying everything around me. My family knew what was happening, but they were helpless. At times, I had no money in my pocket, but I had to use. I started borrowing money constantly. I never stole, never robbed anyone, but I did deceive people. I scammed my own friends. I sold everything I owned, my phone, my belongings, anything I could turn into cash. My family eventually accepted that I was beyond their control. At least if he stays home, he won't get into trouble out there, they told themselves. In one room, they were praying for me. In the other, I was using drugs. It was the darkest moment of my life. Addiction blinds you. Your brain thinks only of the drug. Your emotions push you toward it. Even your very breath feels like it exists just to take another hit. You stop waiting for your parents. You stop waiting for your loved ones. You don't even care about your own siblings. At that point, the drug is your existence. If you don't chase after your own child as much as you chase after a dealer, then you're already lost. I once waited for a dealer for 3 days. 3 full days. In that time, I only drank 2 bottles of water and smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. To keep myself from collapsing, I chewed on tobacco leaves. I stood in a 50 square meter space, waiting. There is no pain greater than that. Nothing in this world is more exhausting than waiting for a high. But there is something even more humiliating. One day, there was a police raid at a hotel. I had to hide my drugs. I quickly stuffed them behind a fire extinguisher in the corridor. I couldn't afford to lose them. I had to use them. The thought of being without them was unbearable. The police caught several people in the raid. They also found my stash, but they couldn't determine who it belonged to. After a while, they finished their search and left, but they took the drugs with them.
What did you do?
I put on my sweatpants, I grabbed my jacket, and I chased after the police. I was ready to ask them to give my drugs back. I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care if I went to prison. They saw me coming. They recognized me. And instead of arresting me, they simply said, "You're not a bad person. Go back to your room." That moment should have been a wake-up call. But at the time, I couldn't even comprehend how deep I had fallen.
What happened next?
I couldn't get the drugs back. So, at 4 in the morning, I grabbed my phone and left. I had worked 3 months to buy that phone. It had cost me a lot. But by dawn, I had sold it for almost nothing, just enough to get high again. Because I had to.
What would have happened if you didn't?
I wouldn't have been able to go to work. I wouldn't have been able to function. By that point, I was completely broken. Living without drugs wasn't an option anymore. You become willing to risk anything, your safety, your dignity, even your life. If you have to, you'd go to war for it. Thank God I never reached that point. But I saw people who did. I saw men selling their own sisters. I saw fathers pawning their wives' and children's jewelry just to get high. I saw people handing over their spouses' IDs as collateral to drug dealers. I saw mothers and daughters being put on the table like bargaining chips. I even saw people using their own children as collateral for drugs. If I told you everything I've seen, it would make your stomach turn. But this is the reality. There is nothing worse than this. Neither you nor anyone watching this could ever imagine something darker. We all like to think of ourselves as men of honor. We say, "I have my dignity, my pride, my integrity." But when addiction takes hold, all of that disappears. Your honor, your self-respect, everything gets swallowed by the drug. And the worst part, you don't even realize it's happening. Drugs reshape your mind. They twist your sense of right and wrong until you start justifying the most despicable things. You convince yourself, no, this isn't that bad. But in reality, your willpower is gone. You're no longer making choices. The addiction is making them for you. When I came here, when I finally entered rehab, I barely had a mind left. I couldn't even say my own name. I couldn't respond when people spoke to me. I was completely destroyed. Now I'm in a different place. But my past still follows me. I spent time in prison. I met people who had severed all ties with their families. I met a boy who had killed his own father. He had a psychotic breakdown while high. When he came to his senses, he kept asking, "What have I done?" But by then, it was too late. This is what drugs do. They don't just consume you. They pull you into a black hole where nothing else exists. And when you finally realize what you've lost, it's already gone. Addiction isn't just about getting high. It's about losing everything, bit by bit, moment by moment, until there's nothing left. One moment of rage, one moment of madness, and you lose control. Then a week passes, and you realize it's too late. Your mother, your father, your wife, your children, you never meant to hurt them, but you did. I've seen people kill under the influence. It starts with a drug. It ends in blood.
Was there a moment when you said, "This isn't me"?
Countless times. After every violent outburst at home, I would leave, sit in a corner, and sob uncontrollably. Anger and regret burned inside me. What am I doing? I would ask myself. I'm hurting my family. I'm destroying myself. But no matter how many times I realized it, I always went back. I would return home, break windows, smash things, scream at my parents. The neighbors had long since started complaining. Everyone who knew me saw what I had become. But I couldn't stop. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It happened over and over again. I would scream at my mother, yell at my father, wreak havoc at home. And then, as soon as I ran out of drugs, I would curl up in a corner and cry in frustration. But as soon as I found the money, I would go buy more. The cycle repeated itself every time. Deep down, I knew that the person I had become wasn't really me. Yes, the drugs had control over me, but I never accepted that this was who I was. I refused to believe it. Looking at me from the outside, people saw someone cold, aggressive, emotionless. But the truth is, I've always been an emotional person. I could cry watching a movie. I knew myself. But the drugs had changed me so much that I no longer recognized myself. I accept the damage I caused my family. But if I were to take all the pain I inflicted on them and myself and pour it into a pool, none of us would make it out. We would drown in it. And that guilt, that regret, it's what ultimately drove me to attempt suicide.
Have you ever attempted suicide? Have you had breaking points?
The signs of my breaking point had started appearing long before I actually did it. But I ignored them. I kept telling myself I had time, until I didn't. In the last week or 10 days before my suicide attempt, my mind completely shut down. I walked aimlessly. I worked, but I wasn't really there. I went home, but I wasn't present. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My brain was empty. Then one day, on my day off, I drank excessively. So much that I don't even remember how I ended up on the bridge. All I know is that they pulled me out of the water. Security had rescued me. An ambulance had come. I woke up in the hospital. But even there, my desire to die hadn't faded. Not even slightly. They ran some medical tests, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. The moment they released me, I tried again. This time, I went to the metro stations. 3 different stations. 3 times I stood at the edge, ready to jump. And 3 times, I climbed back up. Then I called my mother. It was supposed to be a farewell call. I wanted to say, "Forgive me." I called my father too. My mother knew everything about me, sometimes even more than I knew myself, because she had spent years fighting this battle alongside me. Just as I had learned everything about drugs, she had learned everything about addiction treatment. She knew exactly how far I'd fallen. She had even sought psychological support herself, trying to understand how to help me. She told me about a treatment center, but I had already lost hope. "Don't bother," I told her. "I can't be saved." I had only called to say goodbye. And then she said something I will never forget. "Okay, son, it's your choice. But don't ever forget this. If you die, we die too. If you live, we live too." Then she hung up. Those words hit me like a bullet.
Was there a turning point when you chose to live?
When my father hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time, lost in thought. My mind was racing, unable to find peace. Eventually, I got up, found my father, and then made my way to the recovery center. But even when I arrived, I had no real intention of getting better. The first 3 days were a blur. I spent most of my time standing on the smoking balcony, staring out at the world. I looked outside again and again, searching for something, maybe an answer, maybe a way out of the emptiness inside me. Facing myself was unbearable. That period was excruciating. On the 4th day, something shifted. I sat down and started thinking. That day, for the first time in a long time, I prayed. Looking back, that was the turning point of my life. Because if I hadn't prayed that morning, I know exactly what would have happened. That fourth morning, when I stepped onto the balcony, I wasn't planning to come back. I had already made my decision. There was no turning back. But that day, before stepping out, I got up for the morning prayer, and I prayed. That moment changed something inside me. As the days passed, I continued to pray. And after another 3 days, I started to realize something. I had discovered a different kind of treatment. I had come expecting to rely on medication, but there was none. The only thing I had to rely on was myself. I had arrived at the center standing on the edge of a cliff. My right foot had already stepped into the void. My left foot was about to follow. I had thrown my entire life away. The only thought in my mind was death. There was nothing else left. But time passed. I learned. I started listening. And things began to change. Now, I've been here for 43 or 44 days. Maybe I have walked a path in these 40-something days that I couldn't have walked in 40 years. Something inside me has shifted. I feel alive. There was a time when I forgot what sleep felt like, when I was too lost in addiction to remember what it meant to rest. Now, I know the difference between being unconscious and truly sleeping. The anger, the aggression, the constant rage, they're gone.
What addiction really is.
After 20 years, I've finally understood what addiction is. It's not just about drugs. It's about escape. It's about running from pain, from trauma, from everything you don't know how to face. That's why I started. That's why so many start. But the truth is, addiction is the worst kind of escape. It doesn't take you away from your pain. It just drags you deeper into it. I've been to the bottom. I know what's there. And I never want to go back. I know what's at the bottom. That road only has 2 destinations, prison or the grave. There is no third option. And let's be honest, there's no real life with addiction either. It gives you nothing. If I were to gather everything addiction has taken from me and put it in a pool, I would drown in it. There would be no way out. But I found a way back. Addiction pulls you deeper every single day. But I turned around before it was too late. I had 1 foot off the cliff, ready to fall. But now, every day, I take another step away from that edge. I feel different. I feel free. It's like I've been reset. I see the world in a way I never have before. Maybe only God knows what the future holds, but I feel like I've climbed out of my own grave. And for the first time in a long time, I feel good. Maybe, just maybe, because of this place, my life, which has been going downhill for years, will finally start moving in the right direction. I've turned the page. I've started a new chapter. I hope that everything will be better from now on. May God help everyone who is struggling. That's all I have to say.
Addiction is a dark road that drags you down, but there is always a way back. This is a story of hitting rock bottom, but more importantly, it's a story of climbing back up. If you or someone you love is struggling, remember this. Asking for help is not a weakness, it is strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next story.